Much like Joe Rogan, I think Jordan Peterson is one of the most intentionally misrepresented people on the planet, and this debate versus 20 atheists is absolutely no different. From people intentionally arguing in bad faith, to people purposefully mischaracterizing or strawmanning his position, or even just outright insulting him, we're going to get into all of it. With nothing further, I'm going to let the man introduce himself and get right into the video.
Hello there, I'm Dr. Jordan Peterson. I'm a clinical psychologist, a professor emeritus at the University of Toronto, an author, a podcaster, public speaker, and today I'm surrounded by 25 atheists. My first claim, atheists reject God, but they don't understand what they're rejecting.
Good afternoon, Dr. Peterson.
How are you doing?
So this claim here that atheists don't know what they're rejecting. My background is in studying to become a traditional Catholic priest, daily mass, daily rosary, going on long retreats, deep into the magisterium and biblical hermeneutics, like I was thoroughly in it. And it seems like I do know what I'm missing. Is there something that I missed over years of study, both this issue formally and living out religion so deeply?
Well, you obviously feel that you missed something when you were practicing for the priesthood. Your aim was off then. So there's always the possibility that it's still off now.
What was off about my aim in the first place?
I don't know. That might take a long time to figure out. But
Then it seems kind of like this no true Scotsman type of fallacy in which you're the arbiter of people's aims and how they understand those aims to be. How is it that you can claim that people don't know something that you know about their life despite not having met them?
So off the bat, he's already mischaracterizing Jordan's argument. Peterson never claimed to be the arbiter of anybody's points or aims or decisions. This man already said that he is an atheist that was studying to be in the priesthood. Obviously, if he's not studying to be in the priesthood anymore, that means that his aim was off. That's by his own definition.
But I think that you have a reductive view of what atheism is. You've defined religion so broadly to include any sort of having aim in life, any sort of cultural archetypes, or having a metaphorical substrate. And atheism to you is a very specific type of like three people in the world that are these Raskolnikov type of, they want to get away with a perfect murder. It seems like you have the reductive view of what an atheist is.
And again, here he's either mischaracterizing or doesn't actually understand what Peterson's definition of religion is. It's not this overly broad type of thing. It is this belief that there is an ultimate good that all humans either strive for or strive to be. And the definition of an atheist is somebody who rejects the principle that there is an ultimate good. And this actually plays into Peterson's argument that atheists don't know what they're saying when they say that they reject God, because Peterson's definition of God is the symbol or the metaphor for the ultimate good. It is not this singular, omnipresent, omniscient being.
how would you characterize what you rejected?
I think the average Christian believer, when they say that they're Christian and they believe, they mean some sort of God that is all-powerful, all-perfect, is somehow involved in the matters of this world, and that we look to them through wisdom and with the Logos incarnate in Christ. And it also seems like you don't believe in religion in the way that the average Christian says that they believe in religion.
And he would be completely right about that.
And there are as many gods out there as there are believers, because everybody has mutually exclusive and different views of what God is. So it seems
Well,
like
if everybody had mutually exclusive views of what God is, no one could speak to each other.
Now, what he might have been referring to by mutually exclusive is, say, the different sects of Christianity are mutually exclusive to each other, and things like Christianity versus Judaism versus Islam are mutually exclusive to each other. But the people within those sects of Christianity or within those religions all still fundamentally believe in the same God. They do share a commonality.
Let me give you an example. For
Precisely.
example, there's a sub-narrative in the story of Moses where Moses is rewarded with a glimpse of God. Okay, and that's one of the ways that God is characterized in the Old Testament stories.
Yes.
Now, Moses is a faithful servant of God and a good man. At least that's the case within the confines of the story.
one possible
It's
interpretation.
the case within the confines of the story, obviously. But
Well,
there's
not
a-
obviously.
there's
When we look at the Bible can't precisely say anything because there are so many different exegetical and hermeneutic views of this particular book, and that everybody has agreed everybody has disagreed historically on, it seems like, even the most benign detail about a book this big. And it seems like you can only say that the Bible says something if you first presuppose that it's univocal.
So your claim essentially is that Moses in the Old Testament plays the role of a villain or is irrelevant? Because the alternative claim
I'm
is
saying
that
that we
he's
can't
good.
know because
Well,
we can't talk to those
look,
authors.
Now I can see why this guy's an atheist, is because he's also a postmodernist. He thinks that everything is up to interpretation, including the textures, as everybody has their own subjective view on the way the Bible is meant to be read. That's not the case. The only reason that God developed a connection with Moses and eventually revealed himself to him is because Moses had already proved his humbleness, his humility, and his faith. So, for all intents and purposes, Moses was a good guy. It would not make any sense to read the scripture any other way. The only other ways to interpret that would be that, again, Moses was irrelevant, in which case, why would God put in the effort with Moses to develop a connection or reveal himself? Or that Moses was a bad guy and the villain, in which case, why would God have any connection to him whatsoever?
So despite the fact that Moses is a stellar character and he's had a long and difficult life and can withstand a lot of difficulty and travail, God puts him between two cliffs. So he can just see a crack of what's in front of him. And when God walks by, he allows him to see his back. Okay, so the implication of that story is that the divine is fundamentally unknowable. It's a pinnacle experience, and that people in their finitude have to be shielded from a comprehensive vision of the basis of reality. Well, that's not the God that's defined in that manner, right? It's not a simple personification. It's not a simple old man in the sky. It's something that in its essence is unknowable and overwhelming. And that isn't, in my experience, the God that's defined by atheists who are attempting to undermine the story.
And at the end of the day, that's the core fundamental problem and why this argument takes place. Peterson's version of God is a much more fundamental, metaphorical version, whereas most Christians and most atheists picture the old man in the sky, and that's the version of God that they reject. A lot of people give Peterson a hard time for having these kinds of discussions, especially when he's asked, does he believe in God? The response is always, well, what do you mean by God? And a lot of people think that he's just being semantic or trying to be argumentative about it. That's not it at all. It's because he has a fundamentally different belief in what God is than most people do. And until you can come to a conclusive definition where both of you are agreeing on what the definition is, a conversation cannot take place. He does this in a lot of different realms. Until you can come to a consensus on what words mean, conversation itself is impossible.
Tell me everything that you know about the Polynesian deity Lono, L-O-N-O.
I don't know anything about the Polynesian deity Lono.
So you're rejecting something without knowledge of what you're rejecting. That Lono
I'll
is
answer
a
that
being.
question once you answer my question, which is, do I reject everything that I'm ignorant of? Do you think that everyone in the world has to know everything simultaneously for that to be valid and true?
In order for it to be true that we atheists don't understand what we're rejecting, then you need to also apply that to yourself and to Christians and to Muslims and to any other person on this earth, where if you don't understand what you're rejecting the belief in, then you can't reject the belief in it. That's the implication of your claim.
I didn't say that I rejected the belief in Lona. I said I didn't know who Lono was. I didn't say anything about rejecting.
That's because I've asked you several times and you haven't, but let me get to my even greater point.
This guy started this conversation off already arguing in bad faith by implying that because Peterson doesn't know about something, he must automatically be rejecting it. And then he completely strawmans Peterson's argument by saying that if you don't understand what you're rejecting, then you can't actually reject it. That's not what Peterson's argument is. Peterson's argument is that atheists don't understand what they're rejecting. You are welcome to reject something that you do not know about or understand, but that's not the same as saying that if you don't understand something, then you can't reject it.
Pew Research studies suggest that atheists and agnostics actually know more about religion and about religious stories, the foundational principles, than believers.
That's because they're more religious than they think they are.
Right, but they also have to identify with a religious tradition and accept the foundational stories that go along with that.
Well, that would mean more that they're sectarian than that they're religious. And most people, for example, in the United States, deny that they're religious, but accept that they're spiritual.
And Peterson pretty much nails it on the head right at the end there by saying that there is a difference between following a religion and being religious. You can be religious without being sectarian, where you follow a specific form of religion or specific religious doctrine, and being spiritual, which is being religious in a more general sense.
There are many concepts of God, and I'll admit, I find a lot of what you say about that interesting. I'm familiar with it. The idea of this kind of Jungian hierarchical thing, or as a metaphor or a symbol, or the kind of, atheist, materialist, literalist idea of a agentic, omnipotent, omniscient being that intervenes in reality, right? So when I'm saying that I reject the concept of God, I'm aware of these other definitions of God, but I think that when we use words, we tend to only imply one meaning at a time. So the same way that I would say the Mona Lisa is moving emotionally, but I would not say it's moving physically. I would say I reject the concept of God in this very literal way. But
What literal way?
the way that God is this omniscient, omnipotent, agentic, supernatural being that sent his son down and has, caused miracles and all these things like that.
So far, the most reasonable counter-argument to Jordan's point yet is that atheists are not rejecting the idea of God as a symbol or in the way that Peterson is describing it. They're rejecting this very specific, narrow view of God as an omnipresent, omniscient, single being that directly intervenes in people's lives. And I actually fundamentally agree with that because I'm also atheistic in the same way. I don't agree that God is this omnipotent, omnipresent, all-powerful being. And again, this comes down to just the definition of what it means to be religious versus the definition of what it means to be atheist. If you understand religion the way that Peterson does, then being atheist doesn't make a whole lot of sense. The rejection of the fact that there is an ultimate divine good doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And again, from his reading of the scriptures, if you are reading the scriptures in the way that he thinks you are meant to read them, then it would not make sense to believe in this omnipresent, omniscient being, because that's not the way that God is actually represented in the stories. He's represented as a symbol or a metaphor. And an atheist would be somebody who rejects that symbolism or that metaphor.
Do you think that there's an underlying unity of things?
Could you explain that question?
Well, scientists, for example, believe that science unifies in a comprehensive theory. Either things unify or there are multiple competing truths.
I know that, for example, like in physics, people are looking for like a theory of everything.
And why do you think they're doing that?
It's interesting, it's helpful.
But they also believe that there's an underlying unity to things.
In a sense, yeah, like the material world and time and space are probably governed by universal laws and principles.
Partly that, yes, yes, but that the same thing might extend to a broader domain that would include imagination and value.
And I like that Peterson brought science into this because one of the core beliefs of science is that everything in the universe can be explained through the scientific method. And that would inevitably include the conscience and the subconscious of humans. And what would inevitably come along with that is that morality and our values actually come from science and not through religion. And this also ties into the beliefs that people like Sam Harris have, that our morality, our values, our judgments, and all of that is biologically predetermined, and that humans don't actually have free will. Now, if you've already seen the debates between Peterson and Harris, you would already know that Peterson already outright rejects biological determinism and thinks that religion does, in fact, have a lot to do with the way that our morality has developed over the millennia. And just to expand on Peterson's definition of religion a bit, he's not specifically referencing the core tenets of religion of today, such as Christianity or Judaism, Islam, any of those. He's also referring to the very early days of humans where there were shamans that had pseudo-religious experiences, even through things like psychedelics. These biblical stories aren't just the Bible and other texts that we know today. These are stories that have been passed down for tens of thousands of years that have slowly evolved over time as humanity has evolved. So again, when Peterson's talking about atheists, he's not talking about just people who are rejecting the core religions of today. These would be people that are rejecting the core tenets of the stories that have been passed down throughout all of human history.
Could you help me connect that to the prompt?
Well, I'm trying to define God, the God that I don't think atheists do a very good job of defining. Here's another question for you. What do you think guides you in your determination of whether or not what you're saying to me is true?
Logic, memory, reasoning, sensory information.
How do you distinguish that from being governed by something that's false?
An interesting question.
How do you know the difference when you speak between what's true and what's false? So you could imagine
Right? I can infer. I can.
From what principles?
So, and what are you getting at?
I'm getting at the fact that your conscience guides you. Is that reasonable?
Conscience is defined by
Conscience.
my empathy and my reason are my foundational.
Define it any way you want.
Okay, so that's how I'm defining my conscience. Is my my conscience is my sense of
Right
and wrong. Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Yeah,
Where
yeah.
does that come from?
I would say that comes from an evolved capacity to empathize and a recognition of the benefits of engaging with and nurturing that capacity. And then that empathy is constrained and guided by reason, right? Like, for example, I am driving down the highway, there's a kitten in the road. I'm going to empathetically feel, oh my God, I want to save the kitten, but then reasonably, like, I'm going to get hit by a car, right? So that's sort of the process through which I make ethical decisions.
Okay,
is
how do
empathy
you-
constrained by reason?
Do you think that people can differ in their response to something empathically?
Yeah.
Is there a mediating principle that can tell you one person who's empathic and another person who's empathic that disagree, who's correct?
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think that's where we'd have to, talk it out, right?
Mm-hmm.
We do that in real life all the time when we have, whether that's a discussion with a friend about the right thing to do in a situation, whether that's a policy discussion about law, right? That's where we can converse with each other, think about things, explain our perspectives, and then kind of reach a conclusion, right? That I think that we do that all the time.
So Elijah, the prophet Elijah, defined God in the Old Testament as the voice of conscience within.
Okay.
That's a definition.
So to respond to that, I do think there are lots of interesting ways to define God. And that goes back to my kind of opening
Then how do we
statement.
specify what we're arguing about?
We use context clues, or again, it goes back to my example of the Mona Lisa.
I'm defining God as conscience.
And again, we get to this point where we're debating about what the definition of God is, and therefore what the definition of an atheist is. And Peterson's point throughout all of this is that the atheist definition of the omnipresent, omnipotent being is not a precise enough definition, or it's not the actual definition that comes from the biblical texts. And this is what Peterson means when he says that atheists don't understand what they're rejecting when they say that they reject God, because God is not the omnipresent, omnipotent being. God is the symbol of all that is good and the symbol of all that is right. He is the Logos. He is logic incarnate. And to be an atheist, it would mean to reject the Logos, reject all that is good, reject all that is right. And these atheists at the table seem like the atheists that are rejecting the omnipresent, omnipotent being and not rejecting the Logos or all that is right. And while it doesn't really make for a good argument if you're trying to actually hash things out, it does make for good content watching people disagree with each other for 30 minutes at a time. But hey, I'm just some white guy. What do I know? And that was my overview of Jordan Peterson's first claim that atheists reject God, but they don't understand what they're rejecting. If you thought I got everything right and you liked the video, make sure to give me a thumbs up. If you thought I got something wrong or you didn't like the video, make sure to give me a thumbs down and let me know what I got wrong in the comments. Thank you everybody for watching the video, and I'll see you in the next one.